Hey there. If you're a frequent listener to our show, you already know that our show is brought to you by our friends over at Artillery Sports. But what you may not know is that Artillery Sports helps athletes of all types win on and off the course and court. They do this by selling quality, durable, and precision manufactured sports equipment that keeps you in the game, while also using a portion of the profits to provide the funding needed to care for our nation's veterans. With Artillery Sports, it's more than just a game. So head over to artillerysports.com today to buy the quality equipment you need to keep you in the game and to help our nation's veterans at the same time. That's artillerysports.com. Make sure you head on over there today. Oh, and use the code DOCFIRST to get 10% off your first order. Welcome back to Documentary First, an inside look at documentary filmmaking. I'm your host, Christian Taylor, a documentary filmmaker myself, and I'm incredibly happy today to have Peyton Rabb with us. Peyton, welcome to the pod. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So Peyton is our documentary first production assistant from this summer. She came with us to Normandy, and it is, we're going to talk about what happened in Normandy on this podcast. Typically, we are interviewing filmmakers who have a film out, and they're telling us all about their film and what it was like to make it. And we haven't done a company update in a long time about our own film and the things we're doing here at Documentary First. And so this was just too incredible of a story not to share. So we're going to spend some time today talking about the 80th anniversary of Normandy and, what we did over there. And since you were there, Peyton, and it was your first time, we're going to just get things from your perspective, see what you thought, and see what discussion comes out of that. So thank you so much for giving of your time today. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say. All right. Before we start, I want to catch up anybody who is new listening to this, just give you a little bit of background. So, as you know, I just said, my name is Christian Taylor. I am the director of The Girl Who Wore Freedom, which is a documentary film that looks at the story of D-Day, but from the perspective of the French. It's a 90-minute documentary, and you can find it on YouTube, Apple TV, Amazon, Vudu, Google Play. You can also find it on United and Delta right now, I'm very proud to say. It has been widely acclaimed. It's got lots of awards. We're super proud of it. It was my first film, and it's truly a miracle of God that it was made at all. So I'm incredibly honored that it has done so well. One of the most wonderful stories, and what I think is the heart of the film, is a story by a man named Ceo Bauer. And Ceo Bauer was a man that we interviewed in 2018. He is a veteran from the 95th Infantry Division who was one of the Iron Men of Metz. They fought all the way through Europe. They landed on Omaha Beach and then fought all the way through to the end of the war. And he was wounded in 1944, November 8th, right at the border of France and Germany at a town called Mézières-la-Metz. A mess, as I learned how to pronounce. So he was wounded there. He received his $1 million wound, and he then was shipped back to the United States and spent time, about 8 or 9 months, recovering from his wounds. And ever since then, he has been telling his stories and talking about his comrades that didn't make it and why it's important that we never forget the lives that were lost during that war that kept us free. So Ceo really is the heart of our film because he explains to us that so many people really don't want to hear his story. They're too easy to say, thank you for your service. But once he begins talking and once he begins trying to explain his story, their eyes glaze over and they're not really that interested. And when you hear him say that, it just rips at your heart because you realize it's true. We here in America, when we start to hear older people talk, we kind of don't listen so much. And I see that a lot. And I'm guilty of that sometimes a lot. So when you see that in the film, it does really rip at your heart. So one of the things that I wanted to do, Ceo had never been back to D-Day. He had been to Mézières-la-Metz, and he knew that the French people were very grateful for the sacrifices that were made there. But he had never been back to Normandy. And I knew that he didn't understand the immense gratitude that the veterans experience when they go to D-Day. And I thought for sure that he would just be blown away if we took him, and it would really mean a lot to him and to the French people if we did. So he wanted to go back to Normandy because he had been invited by the town of Mandeville to come and represent the 95th Infantry Division at a ceremony they were giving to thank the 95th Infantry Division. They were in their town for a couple of weeks, and they wanted to put a plaque on the town hall to remember the 95th Infantry Division. So they invited Ceo. Ceo told me he wanted to go, and I said, Ceo, we are showing the Girl Who Wore Freedom in Normandy this summer. I would love for you to be our guest of honor there. I will be happy to put together a trip just for you if you're interested in going. And he took me up on that offer. And I was delighted to hear that his two nephews, Todd and Andy, were willing to help us on this trip. So they came as his caretakers. And I thought then that was all it was going to be necessary, me and Andy and Todd, and we were going to be able to do this whole trip by ourselves. And as it kind of got closer and closer, I was beginning to think, man, this is going to be a lot. It's not going to be as easy as I thought. But I was going to push on, and I thought, well, I can do it. It's not going to be that hard. I did a whole documentary. How hard can it be? And one day I'm at my son's lacrosse game, and there's a guy there named Travis Rabb and his wife, and we start talking. Travis has been on the podcast before. We've talked about him. He is a former Army helicopter pilot who called out to me, slid into my DMs, and offered to help me with my son Hunter's situation. And he actually just offered up his daughter as a intern for the summer and agreed to support her trip if, in a sense, she could come and learn what it was like to be part of a film production company and, go to Normandy and learn what all of that was about. And I quickly said, oh, yeah, that would be interesting, not really thinking too much about it. And afterwards, I was like, I don't know if that'll work. And then I was like, oh, it really will work. I really need her help. And as it got closer and closer, I was so excited and thankful that he had made that offer because I realized I really, really needed the help. And we wanted to document this journey. We wanted to share it on social media with people. We wanted to document it for Ceo. I didn't know how it was going to go, but I knew it was going to be something worth documenting. So the journey began. Peyton decided that she would be willing to go with us. And Peyton, I want to ask you, be honest, at the very, very beginning, when your father said, this is what I have for you to do this summer, what was your point of view on the whole thing?
I mean, I didn't have anything else to do, so I kind of was like, okay, sounds super fun, I guess. But I was a bit wary, to be honest, of just the whole, I don't know. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I kind of like to watch movies. That's about as much of a connection I had to interning with a documentary company. I've never been a World War II buff in any sense. I was just a regular person going on this trip, and it changed my life. Little did I know. So, yeah, I really didn't realize how much of an impact it would have on me at the beginning.
Well, and also, we didn't know each other at all.
No.
At all. I mean, you didn't know who I was. You'd never seen a picture of me. At the beginning, you hadn't even seen the film. It was completely foreign to you, and you were just sort of thrown into this situation, and you really had no idea what was going to be expected of you. You were in the thick of things in school, your final exams and everything. And not only that, there was a lot going on your college campus. So let's talk about where you were and what was going on at the end of your school year. Talk about where you go to school and tell us about what year you were and what was happening, at the end of your school year when you were hearing that you were going on this trip and you're trying to contemplate what your summer is going to be and you're trying to finish your exams. Like, what was all that like?
Well, so I'm at the University of Virginia. I just finished up my second year, and at the end of last semester, it was in the thick of the college protests. We had our own college protests against just the funding of the university. So it was a pro-Palestine protest, and it was sort of unavoidable to, I literally walked through the middle of it to get to my exam. It was right during the middle of the exam period. And it just brought a climate to the university setting that really added to my wariness of going onto this trip. I mean, there were so many men with guns on our campus that it just, I wasn't super excited to go to a military-esque trip to France. Like, it wasn't what I really, I don't know, it didn't set me up very well to want to like learn about the history of war and the impact that it had. But then when I ended up going to France, I mean, it just, I got a different perspective of what it was like from the French people to live under German occupation. And they were surrounded by those same guns. And so it was also the American and the Allied forces arms that also liberated them. So it gave me a different perspective, just to see it from an outside point of view. Yeah, it just really opened my world up to think differently entirely.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I love taking kids. I say kids, I mean, you're an adult, but I love taking people your age over to Normandy or to work with me in any way, because it does open your eyes to totally different perspective than where you're living. And I've noticed when my kids were on college campuses, and even when I was there, you're studying things, and it's super important to study these things, but you're studying and learning them in book form. And so you're looking at the effects of war, and you're thinking about all of those different concepts of war and what it does to people. And you're oftentimes, when you do that, you're hearing the most negative sides of things. And here you are in the middle of this protest against war, where people are being killed and dying, and you're seeing people on your campus with guns scaring people. I mean, it really is a very difficult thing to process, I think, when you're, how old are you, 20?
I'm 20.
Yeah, 20. That's very difficult to process. And you're thinking all of these things out and trying to figure out, what do I believe? What do I think? And I did watch you as you're taking all of this in, and it is overwhelming. Like, when we just landed, and we're in the middle of chaos, right?
Hmm.
And we were in the most chaotic place you could be. We were in St. Mary Glees, and it is the center of everything during the D-Day commemorations. It really is. And we landed in the middle of this chaos. And I remember at one time you saying to me, I don't understand. It is so odd that they're celebrating war. Why are we celebrating war? And I had never thought about it like that. It was actually really great for you to ask me that question, or to pose it like that, because I wasn't coming from where you were coming from. And it was a good question. Now, I gave you an answer, which I do think was true. I mean, talk to me about, the answer I gave, and kind of what you thought after you experienced things and you talked to the French people.
I mean, yeah, you sort of open my eyes to, like I said, like just having a different perspective on the entire situation. And I remember we went to an air assault drill. It was the first air assault drill that they did at this D-Day. And I just, while I was watching the helicopters come down and the soldiers come out and they're running around and they're yelling and there's smoke, and I just was watching it and thinking, this is violent. I mean, are these veterans okay watching all of this go down? Like, I was thinking more that this was a scary situation up close. But then everyone was there. All the little boys were dressed in their army GI gear, and it was like they were prideful of it. And so just to look at it in that way, where I was watching Ceo watch the air assault drill, and I'm thinking, I wonder if he's proud of his act of liberation, like that he did something for these people, rather than where I'm coming from, just seeing it as something innately terrible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. What what the French people taught me, and it's not always true in every situation, but what the French people taught me was that if it were not for men with guns that came to their rescue, they could be German. They could be dead. There are so many horrible things did happen and could have happened to a much greater degree if there had not been good guys with guns that came to say evil will stand no more. And so it is horrible that we are in a situation where we get pushed to this degree, where the only way for us to stand up and defend ourselves is that we have to use violence. We have to fight violence with violence. But when you are in a place like the Norman people were, who had been oppressed and controlled for 4 long years, and they couldn't live freely, and they couldn't have what they wanted. They were deprived all sorts of things. And it was just this horrible existence. And they could not wait to be free. And that was such an important thing for them. 80 years later, they are still throwing a party and celebrating it. So for them, these guns were freedom. They are something to celebrate. So, yes, the little boys dress up in their costumes. The French men dress up as World War II GIs, and they drive around in their Jeeps, and the women are in, either GI clothes as well, or 1944 girls' dresses. And it is something that they reenact and recreate out of an immense, sense of gratitude for these GIs, these veterans that come back. And for Ceo, so let's talk a little bit about Ceo. Today, he's 101. He's 101. And we were a little bit apprehensive about what he could handle. I thought, okay, there's going to be 9 days of events. They usually start at 7 in the morning and they go till midnight. What can he handle? And I told him that, if he could, there are 3 events that he really wanted to be at, I think. It was the Mandeville event, the D-Day event, and the Girl Who Wore Freedom screening. And I said, okay, if you can just do those 3 events, then the rest of the time you can rest in the room. You can do whatever you want. This is your time. You do not have to go to all of these events. And so we thought that's kind of what it would be like. But it was not like that at all. It was not like that at all. Ceo wanted to be at every single event. Typically, he was up before all of us. He went to bed, about the same time that we did. And sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night and was writing down things that he said God had told him in the middle of the night. And he was just amazing. And as he watched all of these things, it gave him such joy because he felt thanked. And he felt the love from these people, that they were doing all of these things to thank him. And that was what was so remarkable, because that is what the French people told me they do it for. They spend their extra money, they spend their extra time learning to reenact or buying all these things, and they do it to honor the veterans. And here is a veteran saying to me, I felt loved and I felt honored because they did this to thank me. I mean, it was beautiful. So it does give you a completely different perspective when you talk to somebody that has been liberated. And that's what I learned the first time I went there, is that we talk about freedom all the time. And I want my freedom, and I want my guns, and I want to do this, that, or the other thing. And it means something, I don't know, kind of empty is what it feels like. It feels like I want to do what I want to do, is what it means when I hear people say, I want my freedom. But when I hear French people say, what they say is, I'm thankful for my freedom. I'm so thankful for my freedom. And it's a very different thing. And they seem to have a much greater understanding of freedom because they have been occupied, I think. And so I made this film so that we can look through the eyes of those French people and have a deeper understanding of what freedom truly is, which I think maybe you were able to see as well when you were there. Yeah?
Definitely.
So let's go through each day. So you showed up at my house a few days early, and we were trying to figure out what were we trying to do. Let's talk about when you first got there. Walk us through day 1 when you showed up and we met for the first time and we were getting ready to go on this trip. Tell us all what happened.
Yes, day one, I was welcomed into your home by you and your lovely family and cats.
And
And
cats, yes.
and I just had a warm welcome. We went out to eat first thing. I needed
Yep.
that. And then we mostly I tried to figure out how to use the gimbal, the device that I was using
Yep.
to
So
give
you were
our
in charge
picture.
of social media, and so you
Yeah,
had to figure out how to run your phone, and you had to run the gimbal, which you were going to
yeah.
hold your phone with, and that
Mhm.
was a big task.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And trying to navigate social media world, which my mom always told me not to get sucked into. So now I'm like, Mom, I should have been on Instagram all that time. And so I was learning how to produce content and operate the gimbal to be able to film everything that happened in France. And I'm so glad I practiced. I actually made a short film of Christian's home. I did a little tour of the home and um, yeah, and it was productive, but it was fun. And we also cooked together and we chatted and
You helped
just,
me pack.
yes, we packed. That was a
And
whole
it was a good bonding time, I
ordeal.
think, getting to know each other. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Hmm.
So then we get packed, we head out. We're thankful to United for giving us a great ride over to Charles de Gaulle Airport, where we are hoping to rendezvous with Ceo because they were being flown by Delta. Ceo and Todd and Andy. And you start your work right away, right?
Yes, I got thrown into it. I mean, by the time we got there, all of the people at the airport were welcoming people who worked at the airport, people who didn't work at the airport. There were other soldiers coming in, and I mean, it was just a mass huddled around CO, and I'm trying to get in there with my camera. So,
Yeah, it was you hit the ground running. I mean,
yeah.
you were filming as we were heading to the airport in the United States. You were filming.
Mhm.
I think you were filming on the plane, and it really started rolling when we landed because we were able to meet CEO and everybody in the airport was helping him, and there was just so many people crowding around him, and that was just a foretaste of what was to come.
Oh yeah.
And he was just happy as he could be. We rented the biggest van we could find. And then it's a 4 hour ride out to Normandy, everybody just getting to know each other. My son, Jonah Taylor, who was a sergeant at the 101st Airborne Division, became our driver. And do you remember one of our first gas station stops?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you remember about that?
Well, we pulled over. We were all fighting sleep. So we decided we'd get some food, some coffee, use the restroom. And we ran into this family who was also from Chicago, right?
They ended up being from Chicago.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
And they were just they were in France for the festivities for D Day. And I mean, you can see the little kids look up at CEO
Yeah.
and think like, wow, CEO always talks about he thinks that the little kids are like, is he real? I mean,
Yeah.
he's so old and they're so young. They're just
Yeah.
both in awe of each other, and it's such a cute moment. And so I sort of learned to find those moments with the camera at that first stop at the gas station.
Yeah, again, that was a little practice, but you were it was just starting to roll as
Mhm.
every little step closer, we begin to get more of a taste. And CEO was all of a sudden you start seeing CEO. It was like he was getting wound up like one of those
Yeah.
like I don't know, toys. He just was loving it. So we drive on out there. We end up at our apartment, and when we got there were already a team of French people waiting for us.
Mhm.
What did you think I mean, really, there were probably eight people who were already there waiting for us. They had the place ready for us. They had food there for us. And they happened to be all cast members in The Girl Who Wore Freedom, Thomas and Flavie and Flo and Danny and Gomar, Margot person. And they were just incredibly grateful. That was the first time you had met these French people, yeah?
Mhm. Yeah, I watched The Girl Who Wore Freedom on the plane there so that I could be ready. And then I walk into the Airbnb and there are all these people from the movie. I was like, oh my gosh, these are famous actors. This is crazy. So it was really cool for me, but then they were also, it's just the hospitality when we got there was incredible. They named the Airbnb after Ceo Bauer. His
Yeah.
story was framed up on the wall. And there were a lot of cute little knickknacks that were all World War II themed. And it was all about Ceo the whole time. And we sat him at the end of the table and we ate food while we just listened to all of his stories. And he's a very captivating storyteller.
He's
So
a captivating
it was
storyteller.
really great for us all to get to know him better and also to get to know all of your French friends that were so wonderful.
Yeah, it was a great way. Now, we ended up spending a lot of time with them. So it was a really great way for us to get to know each other.
Mhm.
So we spent about 9 days together, and there was a very rigid schedule. I'd like to kind of go through it day by day, if you don't mind. So walk us through our schedule.
Oh goodness, see if I can remember. Um, we so the that was the first night we were there, and then the next day we woke up, and of course we hit the patisserie and we got croissants, of course. Um, and then that morning, was that the aerosol morning or was that the next day?
No, that was the next day. So this is the day we were supposed to sleep in. We were supposed to rest. So we
We
were
were
in St.
so
Mary Glees, and it's jet lag, and we were really. I didn't have anything planned for CO, but we had this special thing that was created for us that CO said, "Yeah, I want to do." And I guess I'm going to have to tell this part of the story because it actually did happen to me. But I got this email, I guess, a couple of weeks before we were going to leave. And it was uh, just to our generic website. And hello, I am wondering if you are going to this 80th anniversary of D-Day. If so, I would love to help you in any way. This movie, I am the air mission commander for D-Day 80, and this movie kept us caged up and ready for this summer. And I just want to say thank you. And I was like, what in the world? What is all that about? So I wrote him back and I said, I have no idea what air mission commander is or what caged up means. I hope that's a good thing. But what can you do? And he wrote back and explained that the air mission commander he was in charge of all of the flights over Normandy. And that meant all of the commemorative flights. Every ceremony would have these commemorative air flights over them because in the day, those airplanes played such a huge role. And they were, of course, they were bombing all of the big German bunkers, but they also delivered the paratroopers. And so they were very loved by all the people in Normandy. And a lot of times the kids were waving to the airplanes. This is in 44, but it was happening again, here in 2024. And so they were always involved in the commemorations. And so Captain Christian Maude from Ramstein Air Force Base was in charge of all of these flights. And he said, I would love to help you do, whatever you want to do. Caged Up means it kept us inspired. And I was like, well, how did you hear about our film? And he said, I was on a flight, on a Delta flight after my grandfather, who served in Italy, passed away. And it was the perfect piece of God sent piece that I could ever have. And I just want to say thank you. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. And I was like, well, what can you do? And he's like, whatever you want. I can fly a flag in your honor, and I can over the beaches. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And I said, I told him I was bringing CEO. I said, I don't know if you remember him from the movie. And he's like, oh my gosh. Like, I knew that he was just going to go crazy about that. And so he said, do you think he'd be willing to speak to our team? And I was like, are you kidding? I think he absolutely would. So I asked him, CO, and he's like, of course I would. And then I realized that the airport is in Cherbourg, right near where Danny lives. And oh my gosh, maybe Thomas and Flavie would like to go with us too. And of course, as I'm telling everybody that we have this opportunity to meet all of these pilots and load masters that are flying all these C-130s, everybody's like, yeah, we totally want to go. And so that day we did walk around St. Mary Glees in the morning, and we just got croissants. I don't think anything major happened in the morning that oh no, I know what we did. Didn't we go to Angoville? Was that Angoville morning?
Yes. Yes, it
That
was.
is Angoville. I can't believe I'm
Mhm.
skipping over that. So, talk about that. Angoville is a very special ceremony. What did you think about that?
It was very special. I mean, it it was a church service that was, it took place in this old historic church. Do you know what it's called?
Yeah, it's called like the Angoville-au-Plain. It's like I have no idea what the name of the church is, but it's in this little town called
Mhm.
Angoville, and so it's like the Church of Mary, maybe, but in French.
It's the old historic church in Angoville. It famously has blood-stained pews and all of these, the stained glass windows have little commemorations to the war. I mean, it is built to remember the war in every way, and the people of the town voted to keep it all the same and to not restore it in any way, just to preserve the history. So the service was beautiful. It was mostly in French, but they tried to incorporate English as well, and it was really neat just to hear the hymns and feel the presence of the history. I mean, it literally happened in that church, and so it was such a cultural historical experience. And then afterward, we had a ceremony, which Ceo stole the show of because he whispered, I think to you, he was
He
like,
did.
"I want to
He
say
called me
something."
over. I want to
Yeah,
talk. This was the beginning of us really learning like the week was going to be like with him for
yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah. And he
Um,
he
this
walked up
church was,
there, and yeah.
yeah, so special because it was where Kenneth Moore and Robert Wright, two medics of the 101st Airborne Division, commandeered the church, and they turned that church into a first aid station for the Germans, the French, and the Americans. And they made all of the soldiers leave their guns outside, and they treated everyone equally. And after a couple of days, two German snipers in the top of the church came down and surrendered to these gentlemen. And they really did amazing work in this church. And that battle changed hands several times from the Americans and the Germans. But these soldiers, they did survive, and they did help a lot of other people survive. So they were awarded lots of medals, and these ceremonies are there to commemorate their lives, to thank God for their lives and what happened there. But the stained glass windows were bombed out. There was a bomb that landed through the roof and into the middle of the floor. You can still see that. You can see the confession booth, I think, has gunshot, holes in it and everything. So the the marks of the war are still there. You can see them and you can feel them in that place. It's a very sacred place. And after the whole ceremony was done, it's done in French, it's done in English. Ceo did say he wanted to speak. And so he spoke. And everybody, of course, gave him a standing ovation. And he's just thanking people and telling a little bit of his story. So that was beautiful. Yeah. Seems like yesterday, and at the same time, it seems like so long ago.
Yes.
And then after that is when we drove up to Cherbourg, and we went up with the whole crew, and Danny and Flo and, Thomas and Flavie watched as Ceo and Danny told all of their stories to all of these people in the airport, all of the Air Force, all of the French people that just showed up there. And what we didn't know is that French people just show up at this airport because they know that who knows who's going to show up. I mean, President Macron was at that airport. President Biden was at that airport. All sorts of veterans were at that airport. And so the French people know this. And so they just go there and wait around the airport to see who's going to show up. Well, we didn't know this, and they were there, and they couldn't believe that Ceo was there. And so this started, what we began to learn was this pattern where wherever Ceo goes, there would be a flock of French people taking his photo and getting his autograph. And we could never hardly get anywhere because he was just so loved. And he did not want to leave. He wanted to continue signing autographs and talking with people and taking pictures, right? I mean, he just felt so loved.
Mhm. And there was just the longest line waiting to talk to him and to shake his hand, and
Yeah.
French people and American people. I mean, it was really, really incredible.
It was. And that was really not even a scheduled day. That was something that was kind of added on at the last minute, but it
Right.
did set the tone for the whole week. And the next day was the town of Mandeville, where we went, and he was honored by this town. And one of the most special things I remembered there was the town actually found the field where his like tent was and where he lived, and they took him there. And that was so meaningful that they spent so much time researching that and took him there. And that's where we first saw him do the what?
The pump handle dance.
Yes, tell that story.
Oh, he first did it at the airport that day.
Oh, he did? Yes.
Yes, and I wasn't really sure what was gonna happen or what angle to get, honestly. And he pulled up Todd and Andy, his nephews, which he calls his bodyguards,
Yeah.
to hold on to his little his chair that he holds on to. And he goes on this spiel about how he used to not have electricity when he was younger and he was living at the farm, and he'd get bored, and so he'd imagine dancing with all the pretty ladies
Yeah.
by doing this dance on the pump handle while he's getting water for the cows and whatnot. So he's just going on and on and on while we're just waiting, like, what is he about to do? Because he's all stood up and he's got his bodyguards. And then he shows us the pump handle dance. And it was fabulous. I mean, he's this 101-year-old man who's dancing. I don't know. It was
Singing
something to behold,
rats in the
yes.
sugar bowl, 2 by 2, rats in the sugar bowl, 2 by 2, rats in the sugar bowl, 2 by 2, skip to the loo, my darling. And I know that so well because how many times did we see him do that dance? In the course of our time there? So many. I was hoping that we could go through, all of our time there, but we can't because we are running out of time. So why don't you think through some of the really most meaningful things that happened to you, uh, and share those, and let's go through just things that stick out in your mind and ways that you were changed. You said it really changed your life, so tell us some of those events or things you learned.
Yeah, definitely one of the most meaningful experiences was on D-Day when we woke up again before the sun came up and drove out to the beach. It was at Utah Beach, right?
Yep.
And we witnessed a reenactment of the boats coming in and the soldiers coming in, and um, they had the jeeps out and all the soldiers were like in the water and in the sand, and we were also in the sand where they were, and we were all kind of, you could go up to the soldiers and take pictures of them. So we were really kind of right in the reenactment, and it took place at 6 a.m. When it did happen on D-Day. And it was beautiful. There were bagpipes. It was really solemn. A lot of what we did was sort of celebratory, but this one in particular was really it really captured the lives that were lost and sort of the mourning, the lament of that day. So that was really impactful for me, just to see that side of things. And honestly, it was an incredible production that they put on to give you a visual of what it would have been like. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I did too. It's always been one of my favorite things. You go at 6, the landing happened exactly 6:30. You see the sun rising in the morning, and it is low tide. And so you realize when you get there at Utah Beach or Omaha, that the water is way far away. So the boats dropped them way, way far away from the dunes, from the sand where, they would be attacking the enemy. So they had to cross this wide expanse of wet, flat beach as they are trying to take the beachhead and get off the beach. And so you're just so exposed. And so you could see what that morning would have been like. And it is solemn. There is lament. And typically on a regular D-Day, there are hardly anybody there at that hour in the morning. It is a lot of reenactors, and they bring roses and they throw them in the water. And it is a very, very solemn time. This year, however, there were so many people there that it was a miracle that we were able to get very close. And this year they also had Navy halo jumpers that were jumping as well after they were doing their reenactments. It was a spectacle, all of it. It was very peaceful and beautiful, and it was serene, and you could just see how many people wanted to experience that. There were so many activities going on D-Day, but that was also one of my favorite. Yeah, for sure. All right, what else? Any others to
Well,
pick
I
out?
mean, to tell about his book
Oh,
because,
please,
of
yes.
course, that was the most impactful moment of my trip. But um, Ceo brought with him these like manuscripts that he has. He brought like 6 or 7 of them on the trip that he doesn't publish them. They're just he like gets them printed out and hands them out to family members. But throughout the trip, he brought them out every time he met somebody really important, like Christian Maude, who brought us on the plane and made all of that happen. The really important people. And on the last day, we decided we would leave one in the Airbnb just to have there, and guests could flip through it. And this book, it's sort of a compilation of his journal entries from the war, or some from right after the war, when he's recalling everything that happened, and a lot of articles from written about his friends and the war. But it's just it's like I call it an artifact. Like it's just a piece of history from this man's life that it's just really priceless. So of course I'd been wanting one the entire trip, and if on the last night he was giving the last one out, and I was videoing who he was going to give it to, when he like looks at me and he's like, "Here you go," and I'm like, "Wait!" So I dropped the camera, and that was just it was so important to me to be able to. I didn't honestly really talk to him that much the entire trip because I was busy videoing him talking to other people. So for him to see me like behind the camera and recognize that my work was a little bit important, compared to his importance. Like I felt like I was just the little girl on the trip filming everything, but he really made me feel special. So now I have that book, and I like keep it locked away until I want to read it. So
What's so interesting about that is that you were, in a sense, the most unseen.
mm-hmm.
So you were quiet, you were doing your job, you were trying to be very surreptitious, just not in anybody's way. And he saw you. He saw you. And he not only did he see you, but he was watching. He was watching what you did, and he valued everything you did.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to thank you with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it really was precious. And he also, there was a time where he stopped and gave you roses. Somebody, I guess, had given them to him, and he wanted to give them to you. There was another time where I said, "Ceo, look at Peyton. She has the camera. Look at Peyton." And he's like, "Well, I always want to look at Peyton." I mean, he really did enjoy you and was thankful for you. And that just shows the kind of man he is, that he
Mm-hmm.
really does care so much about everyone. And maybe it's because he's felt unseen at times. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it was very special how he was grateful for what you did on the trip. And I was too, frankly. You were a very integral part of my experience there. I mean, you know that. I've told you that. if anybody ever doubts, and I know there are filmmakers that listen to this, if anybody ever doubts that somebody who's never been on a film production before, if they can be useful or productive, put that out of your head. The reason I bring people like Peyton on my crew is because, yes, I want them to learn and be exposed to something new. But every time I have done that, they've given back to me. And I did learn so much from Peyton. I learned from her point of view about what she was thinking and feeling. There was one time where she said to me, I learned that I hang back too much, right? And I don't take risks, right? Whether it was with your French or, tell me in your own words. I don't want to speak for you.
And like I said, I was sort of wary to come to go abroad by myself over the summer. And even though it was definitely going to be one of the most important parts of my life, I don't know. I'm more hesitant. I'm more aware of the risks involved than I probably should be. So it was a good push. The whole trip was a good push Ceo even told me he wanted me to talk more. And I was really the role behind the camera, and everyone else was so important there that I wanted to make myself small. But honestly, he's just that kind of person that makes everyone around him feel important and feel special. And even like strangers were like pulling him away from all these crowds of people because he is having a heartfelt conversation with them, no matter who they are. It's really incredible.
Yeah. And so hearing you say things like that makes me realize, you know what, I can grow in that area too. You were also there for me at the end of the day to be able to process the day. If I'd have been there by myself at night, I would have just had gone to bed, and it was important to process the day or to think about how we were going to structure the next day. And it was just extremely valuable for you to be there in so many different ways. And I want to encourage other filmmakers to bring new people on to your projects, even if they do not have that experience. You can teach them. Peyton, you learned so much by even the first few days in, whether it was about filming or whether it was about being on some sort of team like that. You were a very quick learner, and you became an integral part of knowing how to set things up or knowing how to carry equipment and knowing just all sorts of things. And you just were extremely useful. The other thing is you brought a lot of interesting experiences, thankfully, because of your dad, and he knows certain things. Talk about do you have time for us to talk? Yeah. So talk about the experience that your dad provided for us.
Well, one of his best friends, his best buddies, when we were in New York at Fort Drum, Josh Meyer, he was there coincidentally. It was kind of insane. And he reached out to my dad, I think. And my dad was like, you guys need to meet up or something. And I'm like, okay, I'll meet up with your colleague. But I reached out to him, and he was like, if Ceo wants to see helicopters, we could arrange that. Like, everyone was just so willing to bend over backwards to help Ceo. And so we arranged that, and Ceo got to see the Blackhawks.
Yeah, these were the Blackhawks that did the air assault drill. And this air assault drill, if you don't know what an air assault drill is, Google the 101st Airborne Division air assault drill. It is phenomenal. It's what they do. It used to be an airborne division. Now they're air assault. It's the way you easily insert troops into a combat area. And they do this for exercises. They'll do training, and sometimes people can watch. And they did bring this to Normandy for the first time. So these helicopters were there assisting in that air assault drill. And we did take Ceo there, and he doesn't just go there just to see the helicopters. He went there and talked to these helicopter pilots and whoever else was there probably for 30 minutes, and they stood there at attention listening. It was beautiful. But then they let him sit in the helicopters, which was also awesome. And then we had to pull him away because he's signing autographs and taking pictures with them. They just loved being there too. So you brought that experience to us, which was wonderful. And we cannot let this podcast go without talking about how amazing the Army was. The U.S. Army especially the 173rd, who is stationed in Italy. For whatever reason, they were just mesmerized by the Girl Who Wore Freedom film and by Danny's story. And they followed us the whole time. They followed us wherever we were at our filming or at these talks that we did, because they wanted to know more about Danny and more about Ceo. And at one point, they called me and they said, "Are you tracking that there is a Jeep ride with Danny and Ceo on Utah Beach?" And I was like, "No, what, do you want there to be one?" And they're like, "Well, no, but if you hear about one." I'm like, so I hung up the phone and I was like, called Flavie and I was like, "Flavie, you have a Willys Jeep. What would you think about taking Ceo and Danny in a Jeep ride on Utah Beach?" And she's like, "Yeah." So I call him back. I'm like, "I think we can do a Jeep ride on July 7th. Will that work?" And the next thing I know, we've got this Jeep ride on Utah Beach. And then we weren't allowed to drive on Utah Beach, or it was going to cost 7,000 euro. And the next thing I know, Flo Boucherie flags down 6 Willie's Jeeps. She doesn't know who the people are, but all of a sudden they're keen to help Ceo and make this thing happen. And so now here we are, this convoy of Jeeps driving on Utah Beach with Flo and Danny and Ceo in a Jeep, and all the rest of us in Jeeps following behind them while the US Army is flying drone shots or, shots in the Jeep. That was just a magical day, at which point near the end, wouldn't you know it, C-130s fly overhead, perfectly timed, for Danny to stand up and pretend like, she wants them to wave at her. And that was magical. And then from there, we left to go back to Cherbourg, not to talk to the pilots, but for them to fly us all, and in particular Ceo and Danny, in a C-130. An unbelievable thing that never happens for anyone, but because Ceo is considered a VIP, we all were allowed to do this 2.5-hour flight over Normandy in a C-130, Ceo sitting up in the front. And he was just mesmerized. It was one of the most unbelievable experiences of his life, he said. And in the back, all of us were watching the back of the C-130 constantly being lowered as other soldiers wanted to take their turn of being harnessed and hanging their legs over the back of the airplane, which was scary and awesome. And we were able to see all of the beaches as we flew over these. We were part of these commemorations. And apparently the soldiers were able to be seen by all the people at the beaches. And so they were waving at them. And it was just so special to be part of that kind of commemoration. And I mean, we could go on and on. Ceo talked to children at schools. He was just part of so many different people's experiences. And we were not able to put up enough social media things. We were hoping to post every single day, but because of internet, because of so many different issues, we weren't able to. So now we are going to begin posting retroactively, sort of like our Normandy retroactive, all the things that Peyton filmed. We do not want them to go to waste. So they will be used and we will be sharing those with everybody. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to share? Anything else you want people to know?
No, I think we hit all of the important parts.
Would you ever do it again?
Oh my gosh, of course.
What do you recommend if people are interested in doing something that they've never done before? What would be your words of wisdom to people that are listening to this that have never really gotten involved in film or done something dangerous? What would your words of wisdom be?
I mean, if everyone you know is telling you it's going to be a great experience, you should probably trust them and do it. If it just seems like it's going to be a great idea, and take any opportunity to go abroad if you have the chance and you have the means. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, going abroad is really eye-opening, and it definitely opens your world for sure.
Mhm.
Meeting other people, hearing their points of view on the world, it's a very healthy thing to do. So, and if you're older people, if you're an older person listening to this, become friends with someone that's 20. I'm telling you, it is a fantastic thing because you learn so many things. Not only that, I got a makeover. Did you know that right now the in thing in makeup is what, Peyton?
Well, I'm a big fan of Glossier. Glossier, please sponsor me if you're watching. just the dewy look, the glowy, I don't know if you can tell,
Yes.
but
Yeah. So Peyton gave me
switching
a
colors,
makeover, and
glowy makeup.
we also ended up in Paris, which was, I mean, how
Mhm.
could that be bad? It was pretty wonderful at the end of the trip. We did do a cruise on the Seine, a dinner cruise on the Seine, and we went up to the top of the Eiffel Tower, and we went on the Champs-Elysees, and just, went on Booksellers Row, and there's just experienced life in Paris. It was a beautiful, beautiful time together. So
Mhm.
yes, definitely encourage, if you were an older person, try to make friends with somebody who is a generation younger than you, because it will be a blessing in your life. So, all right. Anyway, you may not have been interested in this podcast, but if you're still listening, I appreciate you listening. And thank you very much for getting to know Peyton and for listening about our time in Normandy. And thank you so much for listening to Documentary First. We believe here that everybody has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it. Bye, everybody.